Welcome to Serpent Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we are here for another poetry discussion. A poetry discussion that comes to us from the hallowed pages of Emily Dickinson. The poem in question, A Narrow Fellow in the Grass. And it reads as such. A narrow fellow in the grass occasionally rides. You may have met him, did you not? His notice sudden is. Let me start over. A narrow fellow in the grass occasionally rides. You may have met him, did you not? His notice sudden is. The grass divides as with a comb. A spotted shaft is seen, and then it closes at your feet and opens further on. He likes a boggy acre, a floor too cool for corn. Yet when a boy and barefoot, I more than once at noon have passed, I thought, a whiplash unbraiding in the sun. When stooping to secure it, it wrinkled and was gone. Several of nature's people I know, and they know me. I feel for them a transport of cordiality. But never met this fellow attended or alone, without a tighter breathing and a zero at the bone. Now, there is, I think, surprisingly much to talk about in this poem for a poem that, it's about a snake, right? But I do think that it is a surprisingly fruitful poem from a discussion perspective here. And so the main question, this is about a snake, right? Yeah. Or is it? So if you were to just Google creepiest poems, I guarantee you in the top 15 of any list that you're going to find, mainly it's going to be Edgar Allan Poe, right? Okay, funny, haha. But you're going to come across this poem. And that level of creepiness was exacerbated very much by the, 2010-ish Slenderman Phenomenon? Listen to it again. But imagine the Slenderman Phenomenon. A narrow fellow in the grass occasionally rides. You may have met him, did you not? His notice sudden is. The grass divides as with a comb. A spotted shaft is seen, and then it closes at your feet and opens further on. He likes a boggy acre, a floor too cool for corn. Yet when a boy and barefoot, I more than once at noon have passed and thought a whiplash unbraiding in the sun. When stooping to secure it, it wrinkled and was gone. Several of nature's people I know, and they know me. I feel for them a transport of cordiality. But never met this fellow, attended or alone, without a tighter breathing and zero at the bone. If you imagine this poem in that light with that sort of mythos built up around the creepy man, right? The creepy slender man who just sort of appears and disappears. And really, if you look at the Slender Man sort of mythos, there was a book by John A. Keel. A lot of people know about this book because of the Mothman prophecies. But there was also a series of stories in that book about the Grinning Man. To me, that read a lot like Slenderman. Though I don't know if I wasn't much into the Slenderman stuff. I don't know if the Slenderman was grinning. But the Grinning Man, very tall, very slender, very smooth skin, strangely smooth skin, in fact. So all of these things were in play with the Grinning Man that I think went into the mythos of the Slender Man. But if you read this poem without the assumption of a snake, And you sort of have to, especially with that second stanza, you sort of have to ignore a few things that are pretty heavy giveaways as to the sort of subject of the poem. If you're willing to grant that uninterpretive reading, if you're willing to uninterpret that part of the poem, then the interpretations thereof become increasingly strange. And if we're talking about this being the Slender Man, I'm not going to mention the shaft part, but, well, you know what I'm saying. So there is that to talk about with this poem. There is also Emily Dickinson here identifying in the masculine. But why? It would be very easy to say that, well, at this time, women authors didn't get published, women poets didn't get published. Emily Dickinson didn't really try to get published. Emily Dickinson, I think, had 2 or 4 poems published in her lifetime, to very little success of those poems. Emily Dickinson called publication the auction of the mind of man. These are all arguments against the fact that she was writing from the masculine perspective in order to garner publication, in order to get this poem published. However, it is difficult to imagine someone scrawling 1,775 poems over the course of their lifetime without some modicum of desire to at some point be published. However often that desire died in Emily Dickinson, surely from time to time it would reignite. Surely from time to time, at least the idea of being published would have changed a thing or two in her poetry. Both of those arguments made, I can't tell you why. I can't tell you why this poem would be written from the masculine perspective. I think that there are some subversive interpretations to be taken from this, especially when you start looking at the snake as symbolic. So, if we're looking at the snake as, well, I'll talk about this later, I think. Let me jot this down. So, this phrase, several of nature's people. Several of nature's people I know, and they know me. I feel for them a transport of cordiality. So, if we go back to that creepy sort of interpretation of this poem, that makes it real weird, doesn't it? If we go back to that interpretation of this poem, the phrase, I know several of nature's people, sounds like what we're saying here is, yeah, I know the Slender Man. But there's also the Golden Ghosts, and there's also Bigfoot, and there's also a couple grays that happen past from time to time. And when you're talking about a mind and a personality like Emily Dickinson, if you're Bigfoot or the Greys or Slender Man, who else are you going to visit? Let's be honest. In this uptight town where Emily Dickinson was from, who else are you going to visit? You're going to stop by and you're going to see Emily, then you're going to grab a beer and be on your way. But it seems several of nature's people the only way that I can really interpret this with the sort of standard interpretation on this poem. Have you ever seen house animals interact? So it doesn't really strike you as weird when it's like a dog and a cat. They get along or they don't get along, or they interact the way they do. But when you throw one of those weird animals into the mix, some people have those tiny horses, some people have a pig, some people have otters, whatever it is, whatever weird thing these weird people love to have in their homes, which is disgusting. Whatever it is, when that animal interacts with a dog, it's funny to the human eye. Because we see clearly, well, that one's a dog, and that one's a pig. But the animals don't really treat each other as different. The animals, the dog and the pig, sort of acknowledge, hey, we both live here. So this idea here where Emily Dickinson is saying, I know several of nature's people. And the poem is about a snake. Are we classifying that snake as one of nature's people? And if so, the choice to identify as masculine, is that to erase the difference between the masculine and the feminine? Which in turn would be to erase the difference between the masculine, the feminine, and animal kind? Is this a life-affirming poem? A poem that just sticks out to say, hey, we're all in this together, all of us. But what is this? What is the this that we would be here for together? What is the this herein we would be together? You understand what I'm saying? I think the obvious sort of interpretation here is the snake as the serpent. The serpent who brought knowledge from the tree of good and evil. Maybe a bit on the nose, though. If, instead of just the serpent, we assert this serpent as something in particular, sexuality, perhaps. The only reason that it sticks out, really, that the speaker here is masculine, is that Emily Dickinson was a female. So it seems that there was some creative choice put into place for that speaker to be the way he is. So it is not too great a stretch to imagine the snake as the serpent, to imagine the serpent as sin, and to imagine that sin as sexuality. Happened a lot, right? Oftentimes, probably the two sins that you read about the most are going to be sins of sexuality and sins of greed, right? Because those make for compelling stories. Sins of gluttony, not a very compelling story. Sins of laziness, very boring story. Talking about sex, talking about greed. Hey, baby, you got yourself a reader. So let's listen one more time. Assuming that the snake herein is symbolism for sort of the sort of creeping nature of sexuality. A narrow fellow in the grass occasionally rides. You may have met him, did you not? His notice sudden is. The grass divides as with a comb, a spotted shaft is seen, and then it closes at your feet and opens further on. He likes a boggy acre, a floor too cool for corn. Yet when a boy and barefoot, I more than once at noon have passed and thought a whiplash unbraiding in the sun. When stooping to secure it, it wrinkled and was gone. Several of nature's people I know, and they know me. I feel for them a transport of cordiality, but never met this fellow attended or alone, without a tighter breathing and a zero at the bone. If we assume, or if we interpret, if we allow the assumption of interpretation that the snake is a symbol for creeping sexuality, and we know the speaker is a man, having grown from a boy, that creeping nature of sexuality seems awfully fascinated about the growing and shrinking and arising and disappearing nature of a shaft, of a snake, which is phallic, of the outright named shaft, and in a community as deeply religious as the community in which Emily Dickinson would have lived, the assumption of homosexuality would have been something which was very much looked down upon. In this way, but never met this fellow attended or alone, without a tighter breathing and a zero at the bone. If one's sexuality is so heartily condemned, not just as sexuality, but as the wrong type of sexuality, would that or would that not cause tightness in the chest? Attended or alone, whether with a partner or in fantasy play. Both of these things would cause distress. So I think that there is a lot to do here. There's a lot to talk about in this poem, which seems not off-putting, maybe offsetting, when you pick it up at first. And it seems like one of these poems that, oh, I get it now, it's a snake. Okay, cool. Next poem. But Emily will not let you off so easily. And it could be any sin represented by this, right? Let's take greed. But never met this fellow, greed, attended or alone, without a tighter breathing and a zero at the bone. That goes with greed. That goes with any type of negative thing that we want it to be. most negative things, most sinful type things in which we might partake, we know at some level, we know at some time that they are wrong. And that narrow fellow in the grass, on a symbolic level, a narrow fellow in the grass. The grass divides as with a comb. A spotted shaft is seen, and then it closes at your feet and opens further on. Put that image in your head. Those are all things roiling under the surface of your consciousness, aren't they? The grass divides as with a comb. When you notice an idea, when it pops up in your brain, it's not fully formed. It's just a little movement up there. A spotted shaft is seen. Then you get that trickling of the idea itself. As opposed to just an idea, it becomes a thing. It becomes a vision of something. And then it closes at your feet and opens further on. Closes at your feet, opens further on. Now we're talking about plan. So I think that what Emily Dickinson is able to do with a poem even seemingly so simple, even seemingly so trite, as, oh, it's about a snake, is to create levels of visualizations that correspond with different levels of what it means to be a person. That's all I have for this poetry discussion, A Narrow Fellow in the Grass. It really helps me out here on the channel. If you did like this video, if you decide to hit that like button, if you were here by chance but not design, consider hitting the subscribe button in order to stick around for more poetry discussions in the future, poetry reviews in the future, short story discussions in the future, short story reviews in the future, novel read-alongs, and opening paragraph videos, and what else do I do here? Writer's quotes, whatever it is I'm doing. Just hit subscribe, will you? Now get out.